integral part of the common understanding between Mr. Kofi Annan and the Syrian government.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for this briefing. My name is Abadi. I'm from Le Dossier. From Le Dossier newspaper.
Le Dossier. Les
Yes.
Dossiers.
I have been here at the United Nations for over 45 years, both as UN official as well as correspondent afterwards. And I have seen diplomatic quarrels both within the General Assembly as well as in the Security Council, even during private consultation, which I had the honor to serve.
Your wisdom.
I have never seen such strong attack of one diplomat against the other, although I have witnessed many attacks during.
It's not personal. It's against the policy of his country. It's not personal.
And I understand exactly how you feel, but I suppose that the President will have an opportunity to answer your questions.
What is your question?
Kofi Annan says that in order to seize all the violations in Syria, you need an incredible system of supervision. What is, in the Syrian government's view, credible? What kind of system do you consider to be credible? Does it imply a military component in it or not?
Mr. Annan's plan is a comprehensive one. It doesn't only state or speak about the deployment of the observers. It addresses many important points. This is why it's called 6-point plan. One of them is the deployment of the observers, but the others are not less important. So we should look at the picture in its entirety, in its comprehensiveness. And I'm glad that the Syrian case has attracted your attention after 45 years of serving as a reporter at the United Nations. That means it's worth it. So we have to look at the issue in its panoramic dimension, rather than to focus on one point. But I will not disappoint you. I will answer your question by saying that by common agreement between Kofi Annan and the Syrian government, one component of the plan, which is the deployment of the observers, will take place. So we are not hiding the truth. But everything will be under, in respect of the Syrian sovereignty. Everything will be led Syrian process. Syrian-led process. So the government will be there. The government will be there in the implementation of each one of the components of Mr. Annan's plan. We are a sovereign state. We are keen interest in safeguarding our political independence and our sovereignty. We are not a banana republic. And everybody knows that. It took them 2 weeks to put Egypt on its knees. It took them 2 weeks to put Tunisia on its knees. It took them 1 year, and then they gave up with Syria. Thank you. Matthew, please.
Just to try to drill down into what happened earlier today, I asked the spokesman for the Secretary General why the UN TV cut off. And he said, I wanted to like your response. He said it was an informal meeting, so these are generally not televised, but because Ban Ki-moon spoke and the PGA and Kofi Annan, there was, quote, evident public interest. So they televised that portion but not the other. I wanted to know what you think of that response, and also more generally, what you think of the Secretary General's role in this year that you've talked about. I mean, he's acknowledged taking flights from the Qatari government. He's in most circumstances, he says that things are up to member states, and he'll have no comment, for example, on hiring an alleged war criminal as his own advisor. But in this case, he's taken a different approach. Do you think so, and if so, why?
Well, actually, before the start of the meeting of this morning, I talked to the Secretary General, and he commended the Syrian government's commitment towards Mr. Kofi Annan's plan. He did not criticize the position of my government. On the contrary, he encouraged us to go ahead in implementing this 6 points plan. So but what was worth it to notice actually is that the PGA while violating the rules and procedures and usurping his post and exercising this diplomatic and media terrorism against me and against my delegation. He did all that in the presence of the Secretary General. And that, in my humble opinion, was also another insult to the intelligence of the Secretary General.
The Secretary General seems to have a slightly different interpretation of the situation than you did. He said today that despite the Syrian government's acceptance of the Joint Special Envoy's plan of initial proposals to resolve the crisis, the violence and the assaults in civilian areas have not stopped. The situation on the ground continues to deteriorate. Deteriorate would suggest it's getting worse, not better. Now, the other thing I think I heard you said was that the Syrian government would not meet the April 10th deadline if the opposition did not have a ceasefire by that time?
No. It seems you didn't hear what my answer to your colleague. I didn't say that. I said those who will not commit themselves to respecting and observing the end of violence by April the 10th should bear the consequences of their acts. It will be up to Mr. Kofi Annan to come and brief everybody in here about who is violating who, about who is violating what. So we are.
But by the 10th of April, the equipment and the soldiers will be moved out.
Heavy weaponry will be withdrawn from the population centers, but the police and the enforcement law forces will be there, and Mr. Kofi Annan knows that. This is part of the deal.
Regardless of the behavior of the opposition.
This has nothing to do with the behavior of the opposition. Okay. We are talking about stopping the violence, not deploying police forces. Okay, the deployment of the police is to protect the civilians.
Okay, what do you say to the Secretary General's harsh words about the acceptance of the plan, and yet the situation continues to
These are not harsh words. These are factual. He is right. Mm-hmm. In some hotspots, yes, the situation is escalating. And I explained why. Because the armed groups are taking advantage of the absence of any commitment by the Saudis, by the Qataris, by the Turks, about respecting and observing the end of violence by the deadline set up by Kofi Annan's, April the 10th.
Mr. Ambassador, you complained about the Qataris not consulting you in advance of holding this conference today.
He did it 4 times before.
Okay. But with regard to this meeting today, as you know that Kofi Annan has been mandated by the General Assembly, a resolution, and not by the Security Council, and he would have, at one stage, to report back to the General Assembly. If you were consulted in advance and given the opportunity just to be asked, would you be able to say no?
Yes.
Why?
I wouldn't have said no.
Okay.
But I would have the opportunity to express my government's position. We are here member states. Member states. We are not members YouTubes. We are not members newspapers. We are member states. We have the right to convey our official position to the PGA as well as to the other member states. This is a very serious issue.
So you would have accepted the convening of this meeting for Kofi Annan to report back to his employer?
Why not?
General,
yes.
But you would have insisted on the right to address
the meeting and to have the media coverage so that the international public opinion would have heard the Syrian government's official position.
Thank you very much. How far your government are going to cooperate with Kofi Annan, and what are your expectations from him?
When we declared our commitment towards the success of Mr. Kofi Annan's mission, we did it on the 25th of March, at a time where nobody was expecting the Syrian government answer to be positive, but it was positive. So we told him on the 25th of March that we are on board. Immediately, starting from the 26th, the escalation of the military operations by the armed groups has escalated. Why? Because they knew at that moment that the Syrian government would take away any justification from the armed groups to continue their military attacks. A week after the Syrian official commitment towards guaranteeing the success of Mr. Kofi Annan's, the enemies of Syria met in Istanbul and declared their other commitment to provide the military groups with arms and weapons, to send them salaries for the members of the so-called Syrian Military Free Army, as well as to send them and provide them with weapons. So either we are working, collectively speaking, through the UN channel, or we are all working through different parallel tracks and channels. It seems these 71 states who gathered in Istanbul did prefer their own track at the detriment of the United Nations track. So those who have great interest in undermining the mission of Kofi Annan is not the Syrian government. It's somebody else.
One last question.
Two questions, one very short. How soon could observers start arriving in Syria once these deadlines are met, if they're met? And then the second question, one of the diplomats after the GA session was speaking about your request for a minute of silence, and he was quite derisive, I would say, about it. He said that the Syrian government was responsible for most of these deaths, and so it was, what he said, were crocodile tears coming from you. How do you respond to that kind of sort of derisive view coming from some Western countries?
This is a provocative way of assessing what's going on the ground. Let's suppose for the pleasure of talking that he was right. Actually, I didn't ask to observe a minute of silence for the souls of the victims who were killed by the armed groups. Exclusively and only. I said a minute of silence for the souls of all the victims in Syria. All the victims. Whoever is behind the killings. But the point was that they don't care about the Syrian blood, whether it is coming from the ranks of the government forces or from the rank of the armed groups or the opposition or the civilians. Their main interest is to create and to implement their own interventionist agenda into our domestic affairs. If he was really sincere about being keen interest of safeguarding the Syrian blood, if he was a little bit smart, he would have played this game and stood for one minute of silence. But unfortunately, he wasn't.
Master, on this what Louis said about this, deployment of observers and monitors, which is essential if once the ceasefire is reached. So, do you think that they will have complete freedom to monitor the ceasefire?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Because as I said in answering the question of our colleague here present, I said the plan of Kofi Annan is about 6 important steps, not only one. Once implemented on the ground, you will see that in principle, in theory, the violence should end. As far as we are concerned, the way we look at it, in theory, if we implement and everybody is committed to the 6 points plan, things should be very quiet on the ground. Because the issue is not only about deploying observers. The deployment of the observers, you know why? What is the main task of that? Is to supervise and make sure that the implementation of the 6 points is going on very well. So they are not going to control or monitor the Syrian army or the Syrian police or the Syrian authorities. They are going there to double check and to supervise and monitor the implementation of, by all sides, of the 6 points plan. Please, this is the last question.
Mr. Annan's deputy, Mr. Nasser al-Qudwa, has been conducting many talks with what you